There is a discomfort that lives beneath the noise of a divided nation. Not the anger that explodes on screens, not the slogans shouted in protest, but something quieter. A trembling sense that we no longer know how to sit at the same table, that we have forgotten how to belong to one another without first agreeing. This discomfort is not new. Abraham Lincoln felt it in the bones of a country he was asked to hold together, a country breaking under the weight of its own contradictions. He didn't run from it. He listened to it. He walked with it. And he understood something we often avoid. Division doesn't begin in policy. It begins in the soul, in the moment. We stop seeing the humanity in those who oppose us, in the space where fear becomes louder than empathy. In 1858, Lincoln warned, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." It's a sentence we've heard so many times, we forget how quietly terrifying it is, because a house doesn't collapse all at once, it cracks, one fracture at a time, and the most dangerous cracks are not the ones in our systems, but the ones in our hearts. Today we feel those fractures everywhere, in the way we talk past each other, in the stories we tell about them and us, in the way we stop listening as soon as someone says something that threatens our certainty. And yet, we claim to seek unity. We call for healing. We say we want to be one nation. But unity is not a slogan. It is not built in a speech. It is not born from shared opinions, but from shared humility. And humility, real humility, requires us to look at what we would rather avoid, to name the ways we have let division become comfortable, to see how we've built identities not around who we are but around who we oppose. Lincoln's strength wasn't that he avoided conflict. It was that he entered it with sorrow, not arrogance. He did not see the other side as evil. He saw it as wounded. In his second inaugural address, after years of war and unimaginable loss, he said something that still echoes with sacred clarity, "With malice toward none, with charity for all." Imagine saying that in the middle of bloodshed. Imagine believing it when you've buried your own son, and the soil of your country is soaked with the cost of hatred. But Lincoln wasn't naive. He was rooted in the belief that even after war, even after betrayal, there must be a return to compassion, because without it, we lose not just unity, we lose our humanity. So what do we do with the division that surrounds us now? We begin where Lincoln began, not by demanding that others agree, but by choosing to remain soft where life has made us hard. We start by remembering that no one is only their ideology, that beneath every opinion is a story, a fear, a hope, a wound. Division cannot survive in the presence of curiosity. It shrinks when we ask, not, how could they believe that, but what have they lived through to make that belief feel true? And, yes, this kind of listening is exhausting. Yes, it is unfair. Yes, it feels one-sided. But so did Lincoln's labor. So does love. Not the sentimental kind, but the kind that chooses to stay even when leaving would be easier. The kind that looks across a chasm and says, "I don't agree with you, but I will not give up on you." That is the kind of unity Lincoln died believing in, not unity without conflict, but unity that survives it. There's a reason we avoid talking about division, not just because it's uncomfortable, but because deep down, we know that facing it will cost us something. It may cost our pride. It may cost our certainty. It may even cost the comfort of believing that we're always on the right side. But Abraham Lincoln knew what most leaders forget. Real unity is not forged through dominance, but through sacrifice. And sacrifice begins with looking inward, at the places where we've stopped being willing to grow. Division is seductive. It gives us enemies to blame. It makes our pain feel purposeful. It offers the illusion of moral clarity, even when what we feel is mostly fear. But Lincoln's life reminds us of a deeper truth. Division, left unchecked, does not just harm others. It hollows out the soul of a nation. He said, "The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion." What does it mean to rise with the occasion today? It means not waiting for things to get better before we act with integrity. It means choosing to build bridges when our instincts tell us to burn them. It means becoming the kind of citizen who sees disagreement not as a threat, but as a chance to practice compassion under pressure. We live in a time where anger is rewarded, where certainty is celebrated, where nuance is drowned out by volume. And yet somewhere within us there's a quieter truth. We don't want to live in a world where shouting is the only language left. We want depth. We want understanding. We want the kind of healing that lasts. But that kind of healing only happens when we are willing to walk through the mess without pretending we're above it. Lincoln walked through that mess, not with perfection, but with humility. He lost people he loved. He was vilified in newspapers. He was misunderstood, mocked, and hated. But he did not let bitterness define him. He did not trade away his conscience for the comfort of a crowd. And when the war neared its end, when others called for vengeance, Lincoln called for mercy. He said, "Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?" That was not a slogan. It was a soul-level conviction that transformation does not come through force. It comes through understanding. And if we want to follow in his footsteps, we must do more than quote his words. We must live his courage. That begins with asking ourselves hard questions. Where have I stopped listening because it's easier to judge? Where have I become so convinced of my own side that I've stopped being curious? Where have I let my hurt become my identity? These questions are not meant to shame us. They are meant to soften us, to remind us that we are more than our opinions, that we are not just defenders of a viewpoint, but builders of a future that will belong to more than just people who think like us. Division feels like power, but it's not. It's a slow erosion of everything sacred, of family, of community, of nation. And the only way to stop it is to do what Lincoln did, to choose courage over comfort, to meet opposition not with fury, but with fierce grace, to say, maybe for the first time, I don't need to be right to be human, because the truth is, every time we choose empathy instead of ego, we repair something invisible. Something no policy can fix. Something no election can restore. We repair the spiritual fabric of a people who are tired of fighting, but afraid of what it means to stop. Lincoln was not afraid to stop fighting. He was afraid of forgetting who we are without the fight, and that is the truth we keep avoiding. Division is not just a political problem. It's a spiritual wound, and wounds, when left unacknowledged, infect everything. So what do? We begin again, with less certainty, with more humility, with a willingness to see those across from us not as threats, but as mirrors. Because perhaps the real work of union is not convincing others to be like us, but remembering how to be whole, even when we're not the same. To live in a divided country is to live with a quiet ache, even if you don't talk about it, even if you pretend it doesn't touch you, even if you stay off the news, mute the arguments, and avoid the conversations that break more than they build. The ache still finds you, because deep down, we all feel the fracture, in the tension at the dinner table, in the space between neighbors who once shared tools and now share only silence, in the loneliness that grows when the world becomes a battlefield of opinions and no one knows how. To sit in a room without choosing a side. Lincoln felt that ache too. He bore it not just as a president, but as a human being who lost friends to politics, who was called a traitor and a tyrant in the same breath, who watched the dream of unity collapse into war. And yet, even in the devastation, he held fast to the idea that we are more than what divides us. He believed we could be stitched back together, not by the loudest, but by the most faithful. He once wrote, "I don't like that man. I must get to know him better." What if we lived by that? What if we saw disagreement not as a signal to disengage, but as an invitation to understand? That doesn't mean tolerating harm. It doesn't mean silencing truth to keep the peace. But it does mean learning the difference between conviction and contempt, between standing for something and standing on someone. Because the truth we keep avoiding is this: Division is easier than connection. It's faster to label than to learn. It's more comfortable to speak than to listen. But ease is not where healing lives. Healing lives in the pause, in the breath you take before responding, in the moment you ask yourself, what's beneath their words? Instead of, how can I win this? And it takes strength to live that way. The kind of strength Lincoln showed when he refused to gloat in victory, when he spoke of reconciliation instead of revenge, when he stood not only for justice, but for grace. He saw that the real enemy of America was not one side or the other. It was the hatred that made enemies out of neighbors, the pride that made dialogue feel like defeat, the bitterness that made forgiveness look like betrayal, and we are still living in that shadow, still tempted to believe that the answer is to speak louder, to draw harder lines, to shout down the ones who make us uncomfortable. But that's not endurance, that's avoidance in disguise. Endurance is sitting with the discomfort, naming the pain, holding the complexity, and choosing again and again not to close your heart, even when it would be easier, especially then, because your heart is not made to be a weapon. It is made to be a bridge, not a soft, fragile thing, but a strong and sacred one. Lincoln believed that. He led with that. And if we are to reclaim anything of what this nation was meant to be, not its myths but its soul, we must begin there, not with declarations, but with decisions, to stay curious, to stay kind, to stay human, even when we're afraid, especially when we're afraid, because the truth about division is that it feeds on fear, and the antidote to fear is not more force, it's presence, it's honesty, it's the courage to say, I don't know the whole story, but I want to. That's the beginning of repair. That's what Lincoln tried to model with every trembling word he spoke. And that is what still lives within us, not as certainty, but as invitation to return, to rebuild, to remain. There comes a point in every era of conflict when we must decide not who wins, but who we will become. Because division, when left unresolved, doesn't just fracture communities. It corrodes character. And that's what Abraham Lincoln feared most. Not the loss of power, not even the collapse of institutions, but the loss of moral integrity, of spiritual courage, of the quiet willingness to choose unity over ego. He understood that the most dangerous battle is not fought between groups, but within the heart of each person who stands at the edge of disconnection and still dares to reach across. When Lincoln said, with malice toward none, with charity for all, he was speaking into a storm. He was saying what no one wanted to hear, that vengeance would not bring us peace, that justice must be tempered by compassion, that rebuilding required more than bricks, it required grace, and grace, real grace, always costs something. It costs our comfort, our pride, our addiction to certainty. It asks us to look into the face of the person we've come to resent, and to say, you too are part of this story. That's not weakness. That's the hardest kind of strength. Because it means holding space for someone else's pain without diminishing your own. It means refusing to let your heart be defined by the lowest moments of this country's history, and instead, becoming part of its repair. We are not the first to face this crossroads, but perhaps we are among the first to face it with so much power in our hands and so little peace in our hearts. And so we return to Lincoln, not for answers, but for reminders. That empathy is not surrender. That kindness is not naivety. That love for country begins with love for each other. Not the kind that flatters, but the kind that listens when it would rather leave. So here is the truth we avoid. We will never build a future together if we keep hiding from the work of reconciliation. Not reconciliation that glosses over harm, but the kind that names it, grieves it, and then dares to say, still, we belong to each other. That is the unfinished work Lincoln spoke of. That is the inheritance we have yet to claim, not through shouting, not through separation, but through a quiet, stubborn refusal to give up on one another, even now. Especially now. If this message speaks to your heart, take a breath. Pause before you scroll. And consider what part of your heart still believes in something better. Leave a comment, not to argue, but to be seen, to say, I'm still here, I still care. And if this space has given you something meaningful, consider subscribing, not for numbers, but for the quiet company of people who believe that healing is possible, even in a fractured world. Because that is what Abraham Lincoln never gave up on, and neither should we.